Hi, this is Scott Tillman. I'm the National Field Director with U.S. Term Limits, and I am here with Paul Jacob, Liberty Initiative Fund President. Paul used to be the president at U.S. Term Limits and has been involved with the term limits movements for several years, several decades now. Hopefully we can wrap this up and get term limits passed so we don't have to all continue to be involved with congressional term limits. But one thing that really lit a fire under the term limits movement was different congressional, I guess the word for them would be perks, but really there's got to be a better term because they're outrageous things that Congress does right up until they find out about them. There was an ICE scandal back in the 90s, but the big one, the one that people went to prison for, was the House banking scandal. Paul, can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, it was a huge issue in 1992 when term limits, we passed 14 state initiatives that year. The House banking scandal, in some ways, was not such a huge scandal, and in other ways was off the charts. And what I mean by that is the issue was that they had a house bank. I don't know why members of the House or the Senate couldn't just use the banking system the rest of us have, but they had their own bank.
This is like an exclusive bank on Capitol Hill where you go and you get a checking account and a savings account. I mean, that like
yes.
Bank that,
and when you and the key element, the key part of the scandal is at the House bank, when you write a check but don't have any money, they go ahead and make that check good. And so there were some members, for instance, I grew up in central Arkansas, and my congressman, when I moved to Washington, was Tommy Robinson, who just turned out to be the biggest check bouncer of all, the number one congressman. He had 996 overdrafts. These are where you're writing a check, but you don't have the money there. And I think that what happened with him and what happened with a lot of folks is they realized they could, in essence, take out interest-free loans by just writing a check and then making the house bank pay it and then taking their sweet time to ever pay it back. 996 overdrafts. If you did that in your own personal bank account, I mean, and I think they charge something when you do that. You run up a pretty good
overdraft protection just for that reason. Yeah, this is going back to the days before. I think a lot of people had overdraft protection, but
yes, and part of the reason I think it was such a big scandal is because they attempted to kind of just poo-poo it, that, no taxpayer has lost any money. That was one of the things they said. Well, the fact that you guys are committing what appears to be fraud is wrong, whether taxpayers are footing the bill or not. And of course, taxpayers were footing the bill up front when they made the overdraft and the bank paid it. The other thing is that it was clear that they were doing it in an abusive way. And so, one, it was the abuse of it. It was the fact that they have a different system and a different standard that didn't make any sense. And I think most of all, it was their arrogance in not coming to grips with the fact that what they're doing is not right. It's also, at this same time or within a couple of years as this was going on, you had Dan Rostenkowski, who was considered as the chairman of House Ways and Means, one of the most powerful congressmen in the country, representing the Chicago area. And he got caught and was 17, I believe, was 17 indictments after he was in his 18th term. So it was made the math easy. But he was basically defrauding the post office, the House post office, and doing deals where he would buy stamps with his congressional funds and then take those stamps back to the post office and get his money back and put the money in his pocket. Now, this is a guy, incredible
congressman.
Yeah, that's what the country kind of said. What? I mean, come on. This is one of the most powerful men in the country being shown to be a petty thief. And so it was this sort of thing that drove people crazy. And it the house bank also had the aspect not just of fraud and of abuse and bad behavior, but also that they're living in some kind of strange world where the rest of us have a banking system where there are certain rules apply and nobody gets special treatment, and they've got this ridiculous system. And it reminded me of the ice buckets that they used to have in the Capitol, because for a lot of us, refrigeration happened a long time ago. I don't even remember it. That's how long ago. But on Capitol Hill, they had 23 employees delivering ice to people, as if somehow we couldn't figure out ice and had to have this Byzantine system where all these people had little cush jobs delivering ice to every Capitol Hill office.
Yeah, hand delivering the ice. Not like,
Yes.
You go to the Hilton and you go down to the elevators and there's an ice machine, or you go to Motel 6 and you go over by the stairs and there's an ice machine, but they would deliver. I can remember this from when I was in high school, this being part of the scandal and people being, it's just the ridiculousness of it, that, everybody at their house has a refrigerator that has an ice maker, yet, and I'm sure they would have refrigerators in Congressman's office, but they're paying.
They have them at the store. You can go buy them. It's like, what the?
And the last, I looked that up, and the last year that they did that, I think they still do something, but the last year that it was on as a line item that they were paying for, they were paying $500,000 a year to have ice delivered to those offices. It's not insignificant.
And it's the kind of thing that you, in a business, in your, look, in my home, my wife, it takes care of things, is thinking about things. Sometimes I'm not thinking. Something can go on and on and on. She's not going to let it go on and on, because she said, no, that's dumb. We're doing something. We need to do it this way. She's thinking about things. In our work lives, in my work life, I'm thinking about that. Oh, I don't want to do that. That we can do it cheaper. We can do it better. And it's constantly improving things. When you come up to a business that isn't constantly improving things, well, a lot of times the lights are off and it has a little sign that says out of business, closed. Because if you're not constantly improving things, they go to hell. And that's what this was all about in Congress. Nobody had taken the time or the leadership to say, hey, we're spending $500,000 on this ridiculous 18th century method of delivering ice. Let's change it. And in fact, after Gingrich and Republicans came in, Gingrich took credit for that change as one of his major things. I don't know how major, but it's something. And used to carry around an ice bucket to tell the story. So some of these scandals, I think what made them so powerful wasn't that somebody did something bad. People do bad things.
Yeah.
It was that you had a system that when they found something bad was going on, didn't do anything to fix it, tried to cover it up, and tried to explain it away as nothing. And it's like with a kid. And sometimes I think we the American people are parents and Congress is our troubled child. But it's like with a kid. If they do something bad, you want to reprimand them. But it's not the biggest deal in the world. We all make mistakes. But when they then pretend they didn't do it, that makes you a little bit more upset. When they then give you some song and dance about how it really isn't so bad, that makes you a little bit more upset. And then when you find out they haven't done anything to fix the problem,
right?
So we don't have the house bank anymore, thank goodness. But the truth is,
we get other things, Paul. We get other.
Yes.
And it's always when we find out about them, people are incredibly surprised. But we're finding out about them. Congressmen and people in those positions of authority know that these things are going on, and they're not going to take action until they get found out. For example, the recent sexual harassment slush fund, where every time somebody made a complaint, they're paying it out of this government slush fund, and it's not like it's out there and it's known and it's been advertised, and yes, we're going to do this because this is the right thing to do. They're just doing it to keep it out of the news until they have to take action. Now it's been found out. Now they have to take action on it.
Yes, I think, and of course, kiting checks or overdrafts are not good. Being stupid with ICE isn't good. But now we're talking about sexual harassment and sexual assault in some cases, and it being not just ignored and papered over, but using tax dollars, our money, to pay off people, and in a system that is designed not just to pay them off, but to pay them off so they remain quiet. This is, to me, probably the most serious abuse of the public trust that I've ever run across. And I was just amazed that, they've now taken some steps to, when they're looking at how do we change this and so on. I don't know why in literally 24 hours that wasn't changed.
Right.
It just is. I mean, if you found out that there was a slush fund at your office to do these sorts of things, and you were the CEO or in a position of any power, you would immediately take action. Our Congress debates it, and yet people are continuing to get paid off.
We essentially, I don't know if it's only two, there might be more forms of it, but it's essentially two forms of corruption that I see. You have the out and out corruption where you're robbing, from, you're getting stamps and you're taking them and returning them and keeping cash. And then you have kind of the legalized, anybody who would look at it would know that it's wrong to spend $500,000 a year on ICE delivery. Anybody who'd look at it would know that it's wrong, that you can float checks for as long as you want to. Nobody else gets away with that. Anybody who would look at it would know that it's wrong to be using taxpayer dollars to pay off and not like fire people or have ramifications or have investigations or anything. Anybody who would look at it would know those things are wrong, but they're allowed because the institution. So you've got the actual criminal side, and then you've got I don't know what the term for it was, where they just feel that it's okay. And
it's arrogance might be one word for it, but it's this separation that instead of representing us, they are in essence separating from us and building themselves a world that's designed for their benefit at our expense. So there's the Me Too and this sexual abuse slush fund. This combines the worst elements of this. It's sleazy, it's rotten, it's involved with criminality, because you know what? When you harass or assault people sexually, that's a pretty doggone serious crime. And it's also about them living in a different world where somehow they get to get away with this because they'll use someone else's money to pay off the poor person that they've abused. I mean, it's not as if it wasn't in the press, but I was a little bit disappointed that there wasn't more recriminations, and I just could not believe that it just goes on without a solution.
So this is one of the things where it's very easy, and you see why people get very upset, and everybody is throw the bums out. We want term limits just because we're angry at the people who are there now. But term limits is actually a policy change that fixes a big part of both of these corruption issues that we sometimes it's easier to talk about. Look at what these bums are doing. It's time to throw them out, and term limits is that solution. But the real solution is if you have new people coming in on a regular basis and somebody is robbing the piggy bank, somebody will see that. When we look at different states and whatnot, New York a few years ago had a big scandal where they were robbing some people who were elected were essentially paying off contractors with bigger amount and getting kickbacks, transportation contracts. A northern Illinois town had a non-elected official, actually a hired official that was, pretty much their only bookkeeper, who had been laundering money for years and years and years. And what you see is these cases where somebody can launder money for year after year after year or do these type of schemes, it's because the same people hold power, and either they're not paying attention to what other people are doing or they're involved with it themselves.
Right.
When you have turnover, you don't get that. And the same thing holds true for the cases of actual out and out abuse of power, or maybe not even abuse of power. You can look at states that have term limits. And I'm going to give you a couple of examples in Michigan and Arkansas because they're easy. In Michigan, we had 2 state reps that were having an affair, and people are like, well, you have term limits and you've got these scandals and whatnot. Well, you know what? None of their office staff, the office staff are the ones who ratted them out and who turned them in, that they were cheating on their spouses when they got asking questions and wanted to know what was going on. Because the office staff was not dependent on that state rep for their job. They didn't have a long-term tie to that state rep. You know, the bureaucrats did not have the tie-in with the state rep, whereas in other places, they'll look the other way. And since their job in the patronage system depends on the same people holding power for a long time, there's a higher chance of that type of, I don't know, I guess adultery is not a crime necessarily, but I mean, it's looked down and it is a scandal. And then you get situations out and out like what we had of out and out crookedness, like we had in Arkansas, where there were a couple of state reps who were getting kickbacks from a college. You know what?
Right.
In a term limit state, nobody wants to defend them. You look at a state like New York or a state like Illinois, they got these things that go on for decade after decade, and people are stealing from the toll booths in Illinois. They're stealing from the water systems in different places. They're stealing from the transportation system in New York. Everybody looks the other way because everybody's got their finger in the pie, and everybody wants to keep their job, and nobody wants to get caught up. But
and the corruption is almost expected. It's almost like, well, that's the way the system works, and that's not working.
But then you get a state like Arkansas, and what happens?
Right.
Somebody blows the whistle on you, and somebody's like,
right.
This isn't supposed to be happening, and I'm sorry, but I've only known you for 6 years. I'm not going to put my entire career and the risk going to prison to defend. You're breaking the law for a few $1,000s.
Yes, there are 2 elements of it. People over time can be corrupted and can see ways that they can take advantage of their position. And it's not unheard of that someone's crooked from the second they walk into a position, but it's not the norm. The norm in terms of corruption is it's people who've been there a while and learned the ropes, and then they do something bad. The other thing that you point out so effectively is it's also that longevity and that entrenchment is what allows people to hide that corruption. So term limits is not going to make bad people good, but it does really remove a lot of the ability to do corrupt things and get away with them. And I know that in a number of the states that passed term limits, they had huge problems with speakers and Senate presidents and other politicians and corruption. And some of them were found out, and that led to the term limit effort. Some of them weren't found out until after term limits took effect. And because of the changes, people pointed out, hey, so-and-so has been, all of a sudden their dirty doings were found out by folks.
A lot of that in Oklahoma. Yeah. Oklahoma.
Yeah. Even in Arkansas, it's interesting that the corruption that has happened just recently, they've had 7 legislators who've been either indicted or convicted of fraud. But that was spurred by a guy who pushed the weakening of term limits in Arkansas in a very phony amendment. And all of a sudden they got 16 years, which is hardly a term limit. But I think that there's a connection there. I think that the people who wanted to be corrupt wanted a longer time period to be corrupt in. And when they got it by hook and by crook, they then went to town. And so there's a huge impact. Entrenched politics is going to get you a lot of corruption. And when you have turnover, it's like spring cleaning. You're going to find the corrupt places. And I know Massachusetts, where they passed a term limits initiative, but the court threw it out. They had, I don't know if it's still true, but the last 3 states, 3 speakers in a row who, after they were in, went to prison. Well, Illinois, it's legendary, you know, how much corruption they've had. Term limits is a great friend to stopping corruption.
It certainly is. I've been speaking with Paul Jacob, the president of Liberty Initiative Fund and the former president of U.S. Term Limits. I'm Scott Tillman, the national field director with U.S. Term Limits. Thanks for being with us.